Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom hearing Religious Freedom Conditions in Azerbaijan. My name is Stephen Schnack, and I currently serve as Commission Chair. On behalf of the Commission, let me extend both a warm welcome and a special gratitude to this morning's distinguished witnesses for being here to offer testimony on the challenges facing freedom of religion or belief in Azerbaijan. The Commission, commonly referred to by its acronym USCIRF, is an independent bipartisan U.S. legislative branch agency created by the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act. Distinct from other U.S. government foreign policy institutions, USCIRF uses international standards to monitor religious freedom abroad and makes policy recommendations to the U.S. government. This morning, USCIRF exercises its statutory authority under the International Religious Freedom Act to convene today's virtual hearing. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to briefly speak to an urgent and parallel religious freedom issue, that of a group of Iranian Christian converts who fled persecution in Iran and who are now in an insecure position in Panama. Their humanitarian visas expire on June 7th, just 2 days from now, and they face an imminent forced return to Iran, where they would be at severe risk, not only for their religious beliefs, but also for converting from Islam. We remain concerned for their safety were they to be returned to Iran, and we wish to draw the attention of the Department of State for hoped-for assistance. Now to return to today's critical agenda, religious freedom conditions in Azerbaijan remain very concerning. In February, Commissioner Mohammed El-Senussi, Commissioner Vicky Hartzler, and I traveled to Azerbaijan as part of a USCIRF delegation to meet with government officials, religious leaders, and communities, and human rights activists. The trip proved both immensely informative, providing insight into the country and highlighting both positive and negative developments in recent years. While Azerbaijani authorities proudly tout the government's efforts to foster interfaith relations among the country's religious groups, these efforts have not translated into a systematic improvement of the country's religious freedom record. In fact, many of the major issues USCIRF documented when it first started reporting on Azerbaijan in 2013 remain unresolved. Azerbaijan's religion law, for example, is among the world's most restrictive, criminalizing religious activities not registered with the state and imposing several burdensome bureaucratic requirements to gain such legal registration. Moreover, even religious communities that are able to register are narrowly restricted in the kinds of activities they can engage in and are subject to government oversight of all their religious affairs. While the religion law has undergone several revisions over the last decade and a half, none of these reforms have fully addressed concerns about the law's compatibility with international law and have instead only solidified the government's control of the religious sphere. At this moment, for example, Azerbaijani authorities detain in prison hundreds of Shi'a Muslims on dubious drug charges in alleged connection to the country's deteriorating relations with Iran. According to human rights activists, authorities perceived the religious activities of these Shi'a Muslims as evidence of their loyalty to Iran and arrested them for operating in social networks outside of government control. The specific activities deemed dangerous include group chats, organizing pilgrimages, mosque visits, and group worship. Many of these Shia Muslims have accused law enforcement, moreover, of planting evidence, beatings, and threats of sexual violence. Another area of USCIRF's concern follows from Azerbaijan's retaking of Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding territories. Many Armenian religious sites there, including historic churches, cemeteries, and other artifacts, have been destroyed, damaged, and remain under threat of destruction, or are being repurposed for other religious traditions. Given these violations, then Secretary of State Antony Blinken placed Azerbaijan on the special watch list for the first time in December 2023. Until Azerbaijan takes tangible steps to improve religious freedom, USCIRF recommends that Secretary of State Marco Rubio maintain the country on that special watch list and advocate for widespread reforms. With that, I'd now like to turn the floor over to USCIRF Commissioner Vicky Hartzler to talk more about today's hearing. Commissioner Hartzler.
Thank you very much, Chair Schneck, and I'd also like to welcome everyone to today's hearing and express my gratitude to our witnesses for sharing their expertise. In addition to USCIRF recommending that the U.S. Department of State maintain Azerbaijan on the special watch list for severe violations of religious freedom, USCIRF also made several other recommendations in its 2025 annual report to address many of the issues that Chair Schneck laid out in his remarks. First, USCIRF recommends that the U.S. government impose sanctions on Azerbaijani government agencies and officials involved in severe violations of religious freedom. Law enforcement often tortures and treats inhumanely those who exercise their freedom of religion or belief in ways not approved by the government, regardless of the gravity or legitimacy of the allegations. Until Azerbaijan makes necessary reforms and holds accountable perpetrating officials who arrest and abuse people for peacefully exercising their right to freedom of religion or belief, the U.S. government must use its sanctions authority. USCIRF also recommends that the U.S. government help facilitate an independent international observer to travel to Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding regions and inventory sites pertaining to religious heritage. This is not only important in deterring Azerbaijan from destroying Armenian religious sites, but also to pursue a just reconciliation and recognize the impact the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict has had on both Armenian and Azerbaijani, Christian and Muslim, religious, and cultural heritage. Lastly, USCIRF recommends that Congress remain invested in the religious freedom situation in Azerbaijan. USCIRF's 2025 annual report noted Congress's expansive bipartisan and bicameral interest in Azerbaijan. This interest was expressed in resolutions calling for the release of Azerbaijani political prisons and letters sent to the highest levels of the executive branch advocating for the protection of Armenian religious heritage. USCIRF urges Congress to prioritize religious freedom by amending legislation that conditions Azerbaijani military aid on improvements in religious freedom, as well as by holding hearings to spotlight specifically the country's religious freedom situation. The religious freedom situation in Azerbaijan will not improve on its own. It will require a concerted effort by the U.S. government. So thank you again for being here. I will now turn the floor back over to Chair Schneck.
Thank you, Commissioner Hartzler. I'd now like to introduce our witnesses. First, we will hear from Audrey Altstadt, Professor of History at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, who has written extensively on the history and culture of Azerbaijan. Her testimony will be followed by Nick Felix Corley, who serves as the editor of Forum 18 News Service, an organization that reports specifically on religious freedom conditions in the countries of the former Soviet Union. Then we'll hear from Arzu Gebala, an independent journalist and co-founder of Free Voices Collective, which is an organization led by Azerbaijanis in exile, working to improve the rights and freedoms of independent civil society in Azerbaijan. And our final witness is Husik Gulyan, lead researcher at the Caucasus Heritage Watch, a research initiative monitoring endangered cultural heritage in the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Full witness testimonies can be found online at USCIRF's website following the hearings. So without further ado, Professor Altstadt, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Schneck. I want to thank also all the USCIRF organizers. I've been asked to give a historical framework for examining Azerbaijan, the state, and its relationship over time with Islam, primarily, and also how that fits into its other violations with respect to other kinds of human rights, but foregrounding Islam, religious rights. Azerbaijan is a secular state, and its constitution does guarantee religious freedom, freedom of conscience. But at the same time, the regime is corrupt, it is autocratic, and it has particular fears which really shape its human rights behavior and its behavior of Islam. It's afraid of threats to its power, threats to the oligarchy that has been in control now for some decades. And particularly with respect to religion, it's very fearful of foreign influences. Therefore, when we talk about ways that it could improve its religious human rights record, the answer that we often hear is that it is essential, given Azerbaijan's location on the border with Iran, to ensure stability and to ensure its continued existence as a secular state. And this is a response that we often hear. You may have heard it in your recent visit. Second, it's extremely sensitive. The regime is sensitive to all criticism of Ilham Aliyev himself and of his family. This is especially true when it is based on religion. And Shi'ism has a long history as a pietistic opposition, and therefore, throughout many centuries, has criticized regimes which it considers to be impious or corrupt. Now, the population of Azerbaijan is considered to be about, give or take, 97% Muslim, mostly Shia, as we've noted. But I'd like to distinguish between cultural Muslims and observant Muslims. We know for sure that there is a great deal of cultural observance. People define themselves as Muslims and not necessarily as Shia or Sunni. But the number of people that are actually observant Muslims is much smaller. Over a series of opinion polls taken in the first couple of decades of post-Soviet independence, the number of people who claim to be observant Muslims grew from about 10% to about 20%, where it seems to be plateaued. A second distinction to be made, I think, is whether Islam is being used as a language of criticism around corruption or impiety, and when it is actually a manifestation of religious extremism. The regime has rarely made such a distinction and really views all kinds of criticism as a threat to itself. The control mechanisms which the regime has used have been increasing over time. Originally, there was a Caucasus Muslim Board, which was not established in 1996, but that's when we begin to see this title. It's actually a revision, a renaming, and only a slight reorganization of an old Soviet-era spiritual board or ecclesiastical board, which itself was copied from the imperial era. And so this has been a mechanism that's been used to control education and licensure of the Muslim leadership since the late 19th century. In 2001, however, that proved not to be enough, and a new organization was created. This was the State Committee for Work on Religious Associations. And this organization was then meant to oversee, as Chairman Schneck has suggested, all of the religious organizations in the country. And its imposition of regulations, the punishments went along with them, were increased in 2011 and then really increased again in 2022. So that now we're looking at really granular controls, not only about education within Azerbaijan as an essential part for licensure, but also examination and approval of the content of religious books and even sermons. So the level of control has become much greater. The treatment of Azerbaijani dissidents of all sorts has been really brutal. This has been extended, of course, to those who are accused of religious extremism. Two of the targets for this have been the village of, excuse me, the village of Nardaran, which is outside of Baku, and the leadership of one of the communities there, Taleh Bagherzadeh. He's also the leader of the Muslim Unity Movement, the MUM or MUM, and he's been arrested on a couple of occasions, reports of torture in custody. And in 2017, he was given a sentence of 20 years in prison. His story and some of the other longer historical connections here are more detailed in my written testimony. Now, to turn to the question of my recommendations for US policy, I would go to look beyond Azerbaijan being on the special watch list, which I think is appropriate under current circumstances. If the US government wanted to influence Azerbaijan, I think a number of steps would have to be taken at different levels, from the highest levels of government to government interaction, through the actions of the US Embassy in Azerbaijan. Recently, during the first decade and a half of post-Soviet independence, many US ambassadors took a very active role in paying attention to arrests on political grounds and so forth. However, as the ambassadors nominated and confirmed for that position, were nominated, as we see the pattern of the nominees from the teens onwards, certainly, more and more of them have backgrounds in business and energy. And human rights has not, frankly, been really foregrounded in many of their interactions with the Azerbaijani government. My recommendation would be a two-step process that could be deployed for representatives of the United States at all levels. The first is to show their awareness and concern for violations of human rights and due process when people are arrested. They could make the argument that there is a real and significant difference between criticism and the use of language for destabilization or extremism. In the case where a political system represses regime critics, the system itself could be said to be driving people toward extremist movements, and therefore safeguarding human rights is in fact a matter of state security. Stage two, I would argue, is to follow up on the verbal arguments made by US diplomats and to in fact actively limit investments and other kinds of financial deals if Azerbaijan continues in its non-compliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Corley, or Mr. Corley.
Thank you for the invitation to speak to you all today. Azerbaijan is a personalized authoritarian state. The regime seeks to control all activity, whether related to politics, the media, trade unions, or religion. All organizations need state approval before they're allowed to exist and function. Participants in any organizations that function without state permission risk punishment. All exercise of freedom of religion and belief by a group of people is illegal unless it has obtained state registration. The state controls the largest religious community, the Islamic community, from the inside, with intrusive oversight over all its decisions. It controls all other religious communities from the outside. To apply for permission to exist, a group must have at least 50 local adult citizen founding members. This bans all small religious communities. Many people are afraid to sign registration applications for fear of harassment and reprisals by the regime. Registration applications need prior approval from local authorities before they even reach the State Committee for Work with Religious Organizations, the organization which is supposed to register religious organizations. However, the State Committee often rejects applications of unspecified violations. Four state bodies are particularly concerned with forcing belief communities to seek state permission to exist: the State Committee for Work with Religious Organizations, the State Security Service, the Secret Police, the Ordinary Police, and local religious affairs commissions. All four bodies have made joint raids on people exercising freedom of religion and belief without state permission. The Islamic faith is under the tightest state control. All mosques must belong to the state-controlled Caucasian Muslim Board, which supposedly represents both Shia and Sunni Muslims. The regime has closed most specifically Sunni mosques over the last 10 years. State control is highly intrusive, and many mosques have multiple security cameras inside and out. The state enforces on all Muslims a Shi'a Muslim calendar, which dictates when they are allowed to pray and celebrate Muslim festivals. Muslims, particularly Sunnis, have objected to this calendar. In 2018, the State Committee took over control of higher Islamic education from the Muslim Board. The Azerbaijan Theological Institute, established by presidential decree in February 2018, is the only higher educational establishment the regime allows to operate. The regime closed Baku Islamic University, which had been operated by the Muslim Board, later in 2018. Azerbaijani citizens who've studied abroad, as well as foreign citizens, need state committee permission to conduct Islamic rituals in mosques. Those who do so without state committee approval risk up to a year's imprisonment or more if they've done this more than once. In March 2022, President Ilham Aliyev signed further religion law amendments transferring responsibility for naming and removing prayer leaders in all mosques from the Muslim Board to the State Committee. All prayer leaders must undergo state reapproval every 5 years. The State Committee needs to approve the opening or renovation of any place of worship of any faith. Some religious communities meet without registration, either because they do not want it or have been refused. They're often raided, with individuals taken to the police station for questioning and sometimes fined up to several months' average wages. Sharing faith with others also risks such large fines. Many Muslims have been jailed, some of them for exercising freedom of religion or belief. Others have been jailed apparently for their perceived closeness to Iranian views. While in prison, many are punished and tortured for seeking to exercise freedom of religion or belief. State Security Service prison guards beat political prisoner Bakruz Samadov when he requested a Bible in August 2024. He was only given a Bible the following day. He tried to have those who tortured him punished, but the courts rejected his suit. Ethnic Armenians who were captured when Azerbaijan overran the Nagorno-Karabakh region in 2023 faced torture and denigration of their perceived Christian affiliation. Some have been denied access to requested Christian literature. Tattoos of crosses on prisoners' hands appear to have been burnt off the skin. Released prisoners of war recount beatings and ethnic slurs based on perceived religious affiliation. Guards have seized neck and wrist crosses from prisoners, broken them and scattered them on the floor. There's a harsh censorship regime in force. The State Committee must approve all religious literature printed in and imported into the country and specifies the number of copies of each named work that may be printed or imported. It also checks the contents of shops that sell religious literature and has a list of banned religious literature, which the so-called Expert Analysis Department, which is responsible for the list, has not made public despite numerous requests. Each copy of an approved religious book needs a sticker, which has to be bought from the State Committee, certifying it has been approved before being distributed. Despite Azerbaijan's promises to the Council of Europe before its accession in 2001, so 24 years ago, and numerous judgments against it in the European Court of Human Rights, the regime has never introduced an alternative civilian service for those who cannot do the compulsory military service on grounds of conscience. Conscience objectors have been prosecuted and even jailed. About a dozen young men who have refused call up have been banned from leaving the country, often for more than a year, as investigators prepare possible criminal prosecutions. Just before I wrap up, just like to acknowledge the support that Forum 18 has received for its work monitoring and analysing violations of freedom of religion or belief from the National Endowment for Democracy. This has been vital in ensuring that we can continue to produce our output and make it available on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corley. Ms. Gebula.
Thank you. The government of Azerbaijan has a deeply troubling and well-documented history of suppressing religious freedoms, particularly targeting its Muslim communities under the cynical guise of national security and counterterrorism. This is calculated an ongoing strategy designed to consolidate authoritarian control and silence dissent. Indeed, the state of religious freedom in Azerbaijan is inextricably linked to the broader human rights crisis gripping the country. We have been observing a systematic dismantling of fundamental freedoms, including freedom of expression, assembly, and association, alongside the widespread use of arbitrary arrests, torture, and politically motivated charges. Independent media outlets are systematically suppressed, journalists face fabricated charges, and civil society organizations are paralyzed by restrictive laws and constant pressure. Human rights defenders, lawyers, and political activists are routinely targeted, swelling the ranks of what human rights groups estimate to be over 350 political prisoners. This comprehensive crackdown creates an environment of fear where no dissenting voice, including those motivated by faith, is safe. We have observed a consistent and chilling pattern employed by the Azerbaijani state to label religious groups as religious radicals, terrorists, or foreign agents. These labels are not based on verifiable facts, but are convenient rhetorical tools used to legitimize egregious human rights abuses, unlawful arrest, and the systemic erosion of fundamental freedoms. This tactic, while refined over time, is far from new. As early as 2007, we witnessed the targeting of Wahhabi Muslims, who were conveniently framed within the prevailing global discourse of combating terrorism, thereby facilitating their repression. The most prominent and widely documented example of the systematic repression is the Nagorno events. In November 2015, a large-scale and brutal police operation unfolded in the Nagorno settlement, a community known as a stronghold of devout Shi'a Muslims. This operation tragically resulted in fatalities, including police officers, and led to the mass arrest of over 70 individuals. The official justification was that an armed criminal group operating under the guise of religion, identified as the Muslim Unity Movement, sought to forcibly change the constitutional order and create a religious state governed by Sharia law. However, what immediately followed these arrests was a litany of egregious human rights violations that paint a far darker picture than the official narrative. Lawyers representing the detained individuals reported in harrowing detail that their clients were subjected to severe torture and inhumane or degrading treatment, often denied urgent and necessary medical care, and systematically deprived of their fundamental rights to a fair trial, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and freedom of association. These violations align with broader reports of torture and ill treatment in Azerbaijani detention facilities, often used to coerce confessions. Despite these undeniable abuses and a clear disregard for due process, many of these individuals were subsequently convicted and sentenced to lengthy jail times. The choice of Nagorno as the focal point for this crackdown was no mere coincidence. There had been long-standing tensions between the state and the people of Nagorno, who consistently resisted the government's repressive religious, political, and socioeconomic policies. The state's narrative deliberately painted Nagorno as a hub of Iranian influence and a breeding ground for spies and terrorists, a narrative actively and aggressively propagated through state-controlled media to garner public support for the crackdown. This manipulation of information is a hallmark of the Azerbaijani government's control over public discourse, where independent media outlets are systematically stifled or forced into exile. Since the Nagorno events, the Azerbaijani state has repeatedly used this incident as a convenient pretext to target non-conformist Shia Muslims, particularly those associated with the Muslim Unity Movement. The MUM and its outspoken leader Talib Akhzadeh have long been prominent critics of the Azerbaijani government, consistently accusing it of widespread corruption and authoritarianism. For this, following his arrest, Talib Akhzadeh and one of other religious leader, Abbas Husseinov, were subject to systemic torture and inhumane treatment. Meanwhile, in state propaganda, the MUM has been relentlessly depicted as a terrorist organization. This disturbing pattern of repression intensified into 2023 with heightened geopolitical tensions between Azerbaijan and Iran. The Azerbaijani government escalated its crackdown on Shia Muslims. A joint statement issued by the Military of Internal Affairs, the State Security Service, and the General Prosecutor Office declared that the joint special complex operational measures were implemented to prevent criminal acts committed by a group of individuals by the Iranian Special Services in exchange for financial interests and through religious propaganda to destabilize the country. This official pronouncement served as the ominous prelude to a carefully orchestrated public relations campaign against Shia Muslims across state-controlled media outlets, further illustrating the government's control over information. I dive a little deeper into this in my testimony that will be published on the website that you can read in detail. The examples I mentioned today illustrate a deliberate, consistent, and chilling pattern in the Azerbaijani government strategy to suppress religious dissent. By framing religious Muslims as extremists, the government conveniently legitimizes the brutal repression of dissent under the pretext of national security. This insidious narrative, supported by state-controlled media and opaque legal processes, serves to obscure widespread human rights violations, including torture and unfair trials. Overall, incidents like the Nardaran case and the events in 2023 reveal a broader, deeply concerning trend of criminalizing religious belief when it intersects with any form of political activism, ultimately serving the government's overarching goal of eliminating any organized challenge to its centralized authoritarian rule. Given this nature of the events and the developments that I've described, where religious freedom in the country, where religious freedom is but one facet of a broader oppressive system, US policy must adopt a holistic and robust approach. Designating Azerbaijan as a country of particular concern under RFA is a one step to move in this direction. Integrating human rights into all bilateral engagements with the government of Azerbaijan is another recommendation. Publicly condemning abuses and naming perpetrators, including officials behind the torture, behind the ill treatment, who have been named in investigations by journalists. Utilizing Magnitsky-style sanctions for broader human rights violations. Restricting visa insurance for implicated officials. Advocating for the immediate release of all political prisoners. Providing direct humanitarian and legal assistance to the victims of religious persecution and broader human rights abuses in Azerbaijan, as well as their families. Intensive monitoring of trials and detentions by the US Embassy officials who are in the country. Supporting independent media and civil society, especially those in exile who are continuing the work to keep shedding the light on the developments in the country. By adopting these policy recommendations, the US government can send a clear, unified, and parallel message that the systemic persecution of religious individuals and the broader human rights crisis in Azerbaijan are unacceptable, and that the US is unwavering in its commitment to upholding human rights as universal and indivisible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gabula. Mr. Gulyan.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm speaking with you today in my capacity as lead researcher at Caucasus Heritage Watch, or CHW, a non-partisan academic research group centered at Cornell and Purdue universities. We were founded in 2020 in the wake of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War to monitor cultural heritage that international scholarly community deems to be at risk of damage, destruction, and appropriation. We use high-resolution satellite imagery to provide regular condition assessment for hundreds of historic sites in the Karabakh region. Due to the association with the region's Armenian community and considering Azerbaijan's prior record of deliberately targeting Armenian cultural heritage on its territory, these sites are gravely endangered. At issue in their preservation is not only the fate of region's irreplaceable inventory of centuries-old ecclesiastical art and architecture, but the cultural and religious traditions of Armenians of Karabakh and their ancestral connections to the land. Azerbaijan's record of heritage destruction has been documented most extensively in our analysis of total erasure of Armenian cultural heritage in Azerbaijan's Nakhchivan region between 1998 and 2005. We were able to assess the condition of 110 historic Armenian monasteries, churches, and cemeteries in Nakhchivan. 108 sites have been completely erased from the landscape. The government of Azerbaijan not only denies the program of erasure in Nakhchivan, but has argued that Armenians were never lived in that region. When more than 100,000 Armenians fled Karabakh region in the fall 2023, they left behind not only their homes but rich cultural landscape comprising hundreds of historic churches, monasteries, and ancestral cemeteries. Given the demolition of Armenian cultural heritage in Nakhchivan region, we assess that Karabakh's cultural and religious sites are at high risk of erasure. Between spring 2021 and spring 2025, we conducted 12 satellite observation missions tracking and assessing between 300 and 600 heritage sites distributed across more than 7,000 square kilometers. Since the start of our monitoring mission in 2021, we have established that Azerbaijan has destroyed 14 heritage sites, including historic churches and cemeteries, and damaged 14 more. We currently assess 30 cultural properties as facing immediate threat of damage or destruction. To date, most visible impacts continue to take place in and around the town of Shusha, where last year we documented the demolition of 18th century Ghazanchesov Cemetery and 19th century Saint John the Baptist Church. We have also documented damage to historic cemeteries surrounding the town. The impacts to Armenian cultural heritage continue to arise out of large-scale earth-moving conducted as a part of regional redevelopment and road building works. Since the end of Second Karabakh War, Baku has implementing plans for massive infrastructural development and population resettlement in Karabakh. We are deeply concerned that these plans will have grave impact on the region's Armenian cultural heritage as the state rapidly develops the ethnically cleansed territories through the construction of highways, hydroelectric plants, airports, and new housing. We offer 4 overall observations based on our work to date. First, the pace of heritage abuse appeared to accelerate in 2024 as Azerbaijan's development work gained speed. Much of the damage and destruction of Armenian cultural heritage in Karabakh to date has been in connection with road work and redevelopment. Second, damage and destruction to date seem to be focused primarily on historic cemeteries, but we have also documented the demolition of 2 19th century Armenian churches. Third, church and monasteries are undergoing cultural appropriation. Since late Soviet era, Azerbaijan has promoted a fictional story of ethnogenesis that suggests a medieval kingdom called Caucasian Albania was the origin of modern Azerbaijani nation and the sponsor of church construction in the region even centuries after Albania collapsed. Armenians, they claim, subsequently Armenified what were Albanian churches. This claim is invoked by Azerbaijani government to legitimize its erasure of historic Armenian art and inscriptions. Fourth, the global response to Azerbaijan's program of heritage erasure has been insufficient. The United States and others were quick to deplore heritage destruction by Taliban, ISIS, and now Russia and Ukraine. But Azerbaijan has not faced any consequences for its assault on cultural and religious monuments. The treatment of cultural heritage as documented in our reports should play a role in shaping U.S. relations with Azerbaijan. The U.S. government, acting through entities like your Council, relevant congressional committees, and Heritage at State, are key to translating monitor programs like CHW into deterrence, because the protection of Armenian heritage in Karabakh region is an imperative not only to preserve historic monuments, but more importantly, to assert the basic human rights to cultural expression and religious practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gulyan. Now to questions, I'd like to turn to Commissioner Mahmoud. Commissioner Mahmoud.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all the witnesses. Such an broad spectrum picture and so many facts and a very, very important point of the history we are, especially after that conflict of 2020. I have a few questions, but I'll just rely on a couple of 3 questions. My first question will be directed towards Arzu Gebula. I really admire and appreciate your work, and this work is not just limited to that part of the world. There is so many different parts of the world going through this thing, and it's a very hard work to be out of country and keep an eye over there. So in any society, fundamental human rights are the pivotal part of any society's progress. And obviously, freedom of speech and freedom of expression is one thing, but religious freedom is another thing. And religious freedom is totally attached or linked to this freedom of speech and expression because most people are shut down on that. Well, my question to you is, not even talking about freedom of speech of people over there. There are so many prisoners in Azerbaijan, especially after the conflict. There are political leaders, there are military people, there are religious people, and I got a long list of that. I'm still kind of verifying that. What measures have been taken, or is Azerbaijani government is letting independent watchdogs, human rights groups, or international agencies to go and meet them, inquire them, because there have been large number of complaints about their physical, emotional, psychological, and up to sexual abuse. And if it's not being done, what measures we can do, because I really don't care whether they are military or other people, because mainly the conflict is kind of being made two religions. I know the fundamental rights of Muslims in Azerbaijan are also being violated, but right now I'm going to more focus on especially Armenians who are under their prison. And what is the role of Red Cross, who has been really a forefront of that? And I understand that Red Cross have been restricted or banned from visiting Azerbaijan. So that is my one question, because you have both input in the country and out of country. And anybody else who wants to jump into this thing after Arzu will be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. As you noted yourself, when we look at the 350 plus list of political prisoners that we have that have been documented by the human rights groups, independent human rights groups, the majority of those names belong to religious activists. And that has been actually the case for many years. I think for the part of the question about what the government is doing, what measures are doing, I think the fact that these people are in jail speaks to the kind of measures that the government is taking. The fact that these prisoners were not been given an opportunity to free trial speaks to the government's intention and their motivation. Internationally, when it comes to getting independent observers from various international institutions or human rights organizations to meet with political prisoners, you know better than I do how much work it takes in negotiating with the government officials to have those meetings take place. And this is perhaps a recommendation taken more broadly to the US officials who will be traveling to Azerbaijan in the future, but also to the current engagements with the country, including the presence of the US diplomatic staff on the ground, to continue to press the authorities and relevant institutions to have these prisoners meet with international stakeholders where they can talk about the many different issues they're facing. You know, it's not just torture, it's not just ill treatment, it's prison conditions, it's poor medical conditions. There's so many issues that a lot of these political prisoners, religious or not, can talk to the international representatives. That's one way to answer your question. And I think the second point I would like to make in all of this is even meeting with lawyers, their own lawyers, can be restricted. So when we talk about having these prisoners meet with international stakeholders, again, speaking to the original question of what measures or what intentions the state is showing, I guess that also answers partly that question. But that could also be part of the ask when meeting with a government official. It's not just a meeting with a political prisoner. It's not just a meeting with a religious prisoner. It's a request to ensure that the government meets its human rights commitments that it has signed up to under international human rights conventions, under international agreements, and making sure that that promise is kept. The problem that we've had in Azerbaijan over the years, over the last decades, ever since we've been observing this crackdown, ever since we've been observing these violations, is there has never been an accountability. And there has never been a mechanism set up to keep the government or its officials to account for all the acts committed. And that what needs to change. Thank you.
Thank you. My next, I hope you answered pretty broadly. Nobody else has comments on that. My next question is geared towards Hussein Gulian. If I didn't say the name right, please forgive me. Thank you for your work and research about that area, and I know it requires a lot of effort. There has been widespread concern and complaints about lots of Armenian archaeology and history, especially in the form of ancient churches and historical worship places being basically completely destroyed or converted or maybe distorted. Not only in Armenia, also there have been examples of some churches in Azerbaijan of Armenian origin. And when all this is done, even then, they're not letting them open them. Obviously, Azerbaijan side also complains about this, that lots of mosques have been destroyed or their sites. So you have more my other colleagues went to Azerbaijan. I think they will have more knowledge about that. But I just want to know from you that on the proportion basis, where the more violence is coming and what can be done to preserve this, not only for the sake of religion, for the sake of history, for the sake of next generation. This is in history, centuries old now. And with this small conflict should not completely erase that. What can we do and how we can really gear towards that particular issue, which is so dear to so many people, not only Christians, but other people who are people of faith or people who believe in history?
Thank you for that question. I think like the most, in case of Nakhchivan, when we see a total erasure of Armenian heritage, and previously there were efforts even by U.S. ambassador in Azerbaijan, by Matthew Bryza, to go to see some sites which were claimed was destroyed, but Azerbaijani government barred anyone's entrance and observation there. So at least in the case of Karabakh region, when we see damage, destruction, or threats to heritage sites, the most deterring thing would be observation missions by experts who would go and ask Azerbaijani authorities access to specific sites which won't be escorted by Azerbaijani authorities, because authorities can escort some observation missions to the sites they want to see, but we have sites that we see are under threats, or we have cemeteries that is sometimes impossible to see through satellite imagery. So I think the best deterrence would be try to form observation missions who can go to access the region and monitor on site, on the ground, what is happening to these cultural heritage sites. Because many of Armenian churches and cemeteries have inscriptions which are religious inscriptions, like Armenians have cross stones or khachkars, which is on UNESCO's list on intangible heritage. So we are observing those inscriptions are removed, or there are signals by Azerbaijani authorities, even by President Ilham Aliyev, that these inscriptions are fake, they should be removed. So, which you can see through satellite imagery. So I think the best deterrence in this regard is somehow some international mechanism which can observation mission who can access to these sites and make assessment.
Just a follow-up question on that. You think in a future visit of USCIRF or any other organization like that, it will be fair to ask some independent observers to go with them to especially visit those areas, because their knowledge of history and their knowledge of well-being of those places might be much better serve the commission or the other organizations who are going to visit so that they can go there, they can actually see and monitor and see what is going on at that point, what has changed and what will change from future? You think is a right ask on the commission side?
I'm not sure about that, but at least the Commission or relevant US governmental entities can at least try to, because the issue is not only just one side that US trying to somehow send observation mission, but also many Armenians who fled from their homes and from their churches. Some of them were living in those all they were living in those in that region, and they have expertise in that. You know, Armenians experts are basically barred to access to this religious site. I'm leaving aside the religious practice in those sites, but also Armenian professionals from the region, Karabakh region, who have expertise in their churches and cemeteries and monasteries. So at least not only in terms of deterrence or sanctioning, but at least there is a way also reconciliation, you know, because Azerbaijan has gained control over its legal territories. Now the cultural heritage actually can be a good way to somehow reconciliation for in terms of protecting and preserving that, because Azerbaijan is saying that I'm restoring some of the historic sites, but who is restoring them? In which ways they're restoring them? You know, that is why somehow forming some kind of not only observation but also trying to bring like two sides, at least Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, to be part of restoration projects. I don't know which is a good way for reconciliation.
Can I just jump in and just to broaden it a little bit? I think the regime does not have much respect for the cultural history when it is inconvenient to them. There's other communities which have faced similar problems. The Baha'i community was very upset about 20 years ago when a property in central Baku was demolished. It had quite a lot of historic resonance for the early days of the Baha'i faith. It was a house where one of their people had lived. That was just bulldozed and their complaints were ignored. The Baptist church in Baku, there's a church in the center on Azadlik Street, just up from the main station, which was consecrated in 1910. It was seized during the communist period. It was used variously as a cinema and a puppet theatre, and they've consistently asked for it back but have been denied it. When I visited some years ago, it was just used, you know, little booths where people were gambling and, you know, mending radios and, you know, various purposes. Why can't it be given back? It's people in the church, their grandparents went there, you know, they remember it. It's something that they consider very important to them. If you look at the Georgian Orthodox community up in Gakh region in the north on the border with Georgia, they've only been allowed to use 2 churches regularly and a third one usually once a year on an important pilgrimage date. But there's other Georgian Orthodox churches which they're not allowed to reopen for worship. Why not?
Thank you so much. I'm pretty sure other commissioners will have questions, will cover others, and I appreciate and I'll just watch it. Thank you so much. I give back to Chair Schneck.
Thank you, Commissioner Mahmood. Commissioner Hartzler.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Felix. Those were great remarks. In that when we were there, we actually visited with that Baptist church, and you're exactly right. They want their building back, and the government won't give it to them yet, at least so far. So hopefully they will do that. That would certainly be a good way to extend goodwill and good faith, saying that they're demonstrating religious freedom and support for that. But I wanted to ask you, Felix, about what happened in 2023 and the current status. This was an absolute huge violation of religious freedom of a monumental proportion that the world seems like has largely just forgot about, where for 9 months, the Azerbaijan government basically tried to starve the people who lived in the Nagorno-Karabakh region, cut off their supplies, medical supplies, food, fuel, everything, and then did a military incursion, and over 100,000 of the Armenian ethnic Christians who lived there had to flee for their lives, and many lost their lives. And as Ms. Gaibula has said, some of their leaders are now in prison, have been in prison. And could you, Felix, give us a little update on what happened to these Christians that have been displaced from their land that they lived in for over 1,300 years through the Persian Empire and the Soviet years? I mean, this area has been Christian Armenians. What's happened to them, and what is their hope of returning to live there in their native land, to find and visit the cemeteries where their grandparents and parents are buried? What's the status there? What's their hope of returning to this land?
Well, like all areas of the South Caucasus, the population has always been very mixed. There are Azerbaijanis in what became Armenia, Armenians in what became Azerbaijan. Georgia has Azerbaijanis and Armenians, as well as Georgians and many other ethnic communities. As you say, Karabakh was mostly Armenian populated during the Soviet period, and ethnic tensions were obviously growing quite a lot, especially when the population demanded unification with Armenia from 1988, and that's when the real conflict erupted. I don't think religion is at the root of it, but it's the marker for each community. Muslims are seen as being Muslim, Armenians are seen as being Christian, and anything that relates to their faith is then picked off and targeted. So, you know, even during the difficult years recently, before the final expulsion of the Armenians, you know, the Russian peacekeepers were trying to protect Dadivank Monastery, for example, but the Azerbaijanis and the Russians would not let local Armenians go there for services, and then when everyone pulled out, they had to withdraw and abandon it. I think it's probably unrealistic that the Armenians will ever be allowed to go back to Karabakh. I mean, Azerbaijan, especially the Aliyev regime, will not allow it. So much emotion has been invested in this on both sides. So I think the population from Karabakh are basically refugees in Armenia itself, and likely to remain there. The Armenian Apostolic Church's diocese for Karabakh obviously it can't operate there anymore, and it's sort of maintaining a ministry to Armenians who have fled from Karabakh. But like the Armenian church in Baku, in Ganja and other places, old Armenian churches, they're defunct, they're not operating, they're closed, and as other people have documented, they face a difficult future.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
If I could add to that for just a minute. Yeah, I appreciate Felix's comment. I very much admire your work, Felix, over these years. The point that the population has always been really quite mixed, and we know this from the early Russian imperial military censuses of the early years of the 19th century when they had control. But one of the things that we've seen in this struggle for particular pieces of land since the boundary drawing of the Soviet period, which started in the 1920s, is that both communities have really mobilized a lot of historical arguments. And some of them are very difficult really to uphold, to sustain in terms of really clear documentation. And so because of the mixing, because of the difficulty of finding a documentary record, these claims do kind of spin out into very angry, more emotional rather than factual kinds of arguments. So that's a thing to remember. And the second point is that, and this is partly a cautionary and a rather subtle point for the US to pursue, I would say, is that there's a lot of publicity now in the 21st century about what has happened in these recent decades over Azerbaijan retaking this territory. But when the conflict began in 1987, 8, 9, before the Soviet Union broke up, and this was an internal Soviet conflict between two republics, the Armenians were the ones that were successful in being able to occupy this territory. And there were tens of thousands of Azerbaijani displaced people. But there was no global attention. There were no reporters from outside. And that story is told domestically in Azerbaijan. I've struggled over the years to piece things of it together, and it's incomplete. But one of the things which Azerbaijanis will say, sometimes only privately, is where was the international outcry when we were being forced out of our houses? Where was the international outcry when our historical monuments were being destroyed? And so it's not as if this is not completely appropriate defense of Armenian religious and cultural heritage. But the Azerbaijanis see this as uneven treatment by the world of their situation. And so I think that US and other Western representatives, if they're more mindful of those sensitivities, will be able to approach the issue more successfully, rather than playing into the argument that, well, you only care because those are Armenians and they're your fellow Christians, and allowing this regime to dismiss that. So that's my intervention. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate Ms. Gebula, your story. I can't imagine what it's like being in exile. In fact, when we were there, they had just kicked out of the country the last independent media that the country had. And so it is totally controlled by the state. The information that the citizens get is controlled by the government. And saw something else disturbing there. In the last 6 months or so, Azerbaijani authorities have arrested human rights activists seemingly over their work that's supported by the United States. And in December, there was an incident that was very concerning. Rufat Safarov was arrested right before he was going to come to America to receive an award from the Secretary of State for his wonderful human rights work there in the country. And before he could come get his award, the government arrested him. And then in March, after our visit and after we had visited with Bashir Sulaymanli, he was arrested, according to his work. And we appreciate the brave people who are willing to meet with us. We were there in March, and it was very concerning to hear that one of the individuals who came to share their story, the government has arrested. So what do you think this says about Azerbaijani and US relations? And I would just say, before I get your response, that I call upon the Azerbaijani country to release these two individuals. This is unacceptable. These are individuals that the United States has worked with and talked to and is fighting for just human rights, international standards, and they've been imprisoned. So I wanted to get that in, but I would love to hear your response to what this says about our relations when the government arrests people who are willing to speak out for human rights and religious freedom issues.
Sure, and thank you for that question, and thank you for mentioning Rufat Safarov and Bashir Sulaymanli. Speaking of Rufat Safarov, his pretrial detention was extended one more time, and he will remain in pretrial detention until end of this month, until end of June. What can we say about the relations? I'm going to be very frank. The situation was bad in the country, and it only gotten worse after the results of the US elections. And there seems to be this opinion that authoritarian leaders are acting authoritarian leaders who were already very bold, they've been emboldened by the election results, and that goes and that is being said because of the lack of mentioning of human rights, a lack of mentioning or statements coming from the US government, specifically targeting and specifically sort of focusing on the situation in the country. You know, Azerbaijan isn't, the situation in Azerbaijan didn't get worse overnight. This has been happening for decades, as I also mentioned in my testimony. And since November 2023, we are seeing another unprecedented crackdown. And if you remember, in 2013, we had this first massive crackdown on civil society that had very similar approach to silencing dissent, silencing journalists and political activists. What is different is there's a very different government that we're seeing. It's bolder, it's ruthless, and a lot of it is an outcome of, again, as I said in my previous answer, lack of accountability mechanisms. No one has been held to account for the government actions. What can be done to improve the situation? Pushing the government to account for the atrocities, for the human rights violations, for the crackdown that it's committing. And this needs to happen both publicly and privately, when meeting with officials behind closed doors, when meeting them in public spaces. Mention that it's concerning. You've just mentioned and called for Bashir Suleiman's release, for Rifat Safarov's release. There are countless individuals like Rifat Safarov, like Bashir Suleiman. We have 25 journalists since November 2023 until June 2025. We've seen 25 journalists sent into pre-trial detention. These are independent journalists who have been working for independent outlets. Some of them have been working for opposition outlets, but it doesn't matter. These are journalists who have been holding the government to account, demanding answers, who have been covering violations, who have been covering social issues, and yet they are behind the bars. They're the ones who've been writing about the corruption, and yet they're the ones behind bars. So it speaks what we can say of the relations. I think it speaks of the fact that it's not, I don't want to put the US government on the spotlight, but I think it speaks to the fact that up until now, we never really saw a full-on political commitment to make human rights a priority in relations with the government of Azerbaijan.
Great. Thank you. Those are really great points. I have more questions if there's time, but I want to make sure and turn it back to our chairman for his questions. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Commissioner Hartzer. Commissioner El-Senussi.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chair Schnack, and let me also add my appreciation and thanks to our witnesses here. Thank you so much. I do have a couple of questions. One, I was on the ground with my colleagues, Chair Schnack, as well as Commissioner Hatzler in Azerbaijan, and we met a number of people and a number of human rights advocates and government and all of that. One questions we really still were trying to figure that out is the particularly related to the prisoners. You mentioned that there are more than 300 prisoners there, in Azerbaijan, and we heard that number again. But because of our mandate here as a commission is really focusing on the religious freedom violation, and we are yet to determine those prisoners are political prisoners or prisoners because of their religion or religious practices, and they are tortured and all kind of abuses happen because of their religious practices. So, I mean, if you can just help us how to better understand that. We have been asking these questions all the time. So, so maybe if you can answer that, any one of you has the knowledge there, that would be great.
Shall I go first? Oh, Arzu, please.
Sure. I mean, the reason why the number is so high, obviously, is because we also have the religious prisoners on that list. And the reason why they are included on the list of political prisoners, are documented as part of that list, is because the human rights defenders and observers in Azerbaijan and outside of Azerbaijan consider their cases political, because their leaders, the members of the party, they were openly criticizing the authorities. They've been openly criticizing the corruption. They've been openly criticizing the inequality in the country created as the result of unfair policies in the government. And their arrest was directly linked to their open criticism of the state. So this is why they're there. We can discuss for many hours whether we should be keeping them separate, whether they need their own list. But when it comes to political prisoners, or when it comes to overall crackdown in the country, I think all of the witnesses highlighted that in their testimonies. There is a fear of any dissent, and that fear applies to anyone who is criticizing the authorities openly, whether it's a constructive criticism or it's some blogger posting a video talking about the inequality in the country. It does not matter, because there is a fear of what it would lead to in a society that is basically completely prevented from having access to independent outlets or having access to independent information. So my answer, I hope my answer clarifies the confusion in where they fall into, in which category they fall into.
Can I just add to that then? Yes, I agree. To say that someone has been jailed for their freedom of religion or belief, a couple of years ago there were some Jehovah's Witnesses, 2 women in particular. There were Baptist pastors earlier, a couple of them. Then more recently there have been Jehovah's Witness conscientious objectors. Their objection to compulsory military service was clearly motivated by their religious faith. They were willing to do an alternative service. One was not offered. They were jailed or given suspended sentences. The large group of Shia Muslims, it's very difficult to say categorically, just because you're a Shia Muslim and you're jailed, you're going to be charges against you are going to be fabricated. They ask the person who's been arrested, we could do you on, if you admit to drugs charges, you'll get 4 years. If we if you refuse that, we'll try you as an extremist and you'll get 10, 15, 20 years. So many of them are convicted on drugs charges, of which they are completely innocent. But that does not make them a religious prisoner of conscience. Some of them are, but I mean, so for example, someone edited a Muslim-inspired website which criticized the regime and its corruption. Is that a religious issue or is that a political issue? So I don't think the government even knows or even cares. They just identify people as enemies or potential enemies, a threat. They're going to arrest them, beat them, torture them, fabricate evidence. It's almost impossible to find a defense lawyer who's going to take a difficult case, or there are very few of them who are prepared to do so. The court is basically a rubber stamp court. The secret police, everyone is building a case against you. Then under such pressure, people say, okay, well, I'll admit to drug trafficking or whatever and get a shorter sentence, and they go to prison. But just working out which ones are religious prisoners, which ones are political, it's so difficult. But that does not mean that these people should be in jail. They should not be in jail. These charges are fabricated.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. This is very helpful. Cherishnak, can I follow up another questions on the Karabakh region?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, so the picture, of course, the destruction and erasing the the cultural and religious heritage is something that's really concerning. We understand that UNESCO tried to do an assessment mission to the region, but they are yet to be granted permission from Azerbaijan government. Anything that we could do as USCIRF, because this is really what we need to have kind of an assessment mission to the region. And then I also want to tie that to another something that's bothering me, which is I understand that the number of Armenians they are hoping to go for pilgrimages to the region, to Karabakh region as a pilgrimage, but still they're also not getting kind of the permission to do that. I understand the World Council of Churches is interested or wanted to facilitate for this people to go to visit those sites as well. So I would love to hear what you can say there.
Oh, thank you. So I think it would be great if UNESCO takes the lead in terms of like observation mission to the region, because UNESCO has that capacity. It's a cultural heritage organization focused on that. But I'm skeptical about that UNESCO is going to be able to do that, considering the way Azerbaijani authorities talk about the discourse of Azerbaijani authorities about cultural heritage of Armenians in the region. But I'm not sure what kind of mechanism would make it possible actually to land UNESCO observers in Karabakh. So that is why, like, it's not only about cultural heritage, just like preservation, but also it's very important, critical, so that Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, who are like 100,000 people who are now refugees in the Republic of Armenia, would have access to pilgrimage, not only to this historic church, which were they going to practicing their religion, but also they buried their grandfathers, their ancestors in those cemeteries. So they would have access to visit all those places. Probably you during the outbreak of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, you were hearing that maybe that there was news that people were digging out the remnants of their ancestors to take to Armenia, because they had concerns that what is going to happen to those graves of their ancestors. So, like, people have these concerns, so, but many of people still have their ancestors there, their fathers, their grandfathers, their brothers, sisters in those cemeteries. So at least there should be some kind of mechanism that should allow Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. I'm totally skeptical that there would be either possible to return of these people to their homes and live there, but at least for now or for midterm, there should some mechanism so that people can visit their cemeteries and also practice their religions in those churches, in the communal churches.
Thank you, Mr. Gulian. If I might take the floor for a moment and ask a question or two. One of the things that I'd like to consider is the difference between interfaith harmony and the right to religious freedom. In our visit to Azerbaijan just a few months ago, it won't surprise you that government officials really emphasized and promoted how successful the country was in their words in fostering interfaith harmony in the country, and pointed to the Catholic community, to the Jewish community, to the Baptist Church, and several other minorities. We met with these people, and I have to say that for the most part, all of them had good things to say about the fact that their religious identities as minority religions in the country was respected. But I'd like to ask each of the witnesses to think for a moment about the distinction between religious harmony and the right to religious freedom, and ask you all, to what extent are these efforts on the part of the Azerbaijani government to advance religious harmony, also advancing religious freedom, and then secondly, do you think that the government actually understands the difference between religious harmony and religious freedom? And perhaps we might start with Professor Altstadt, if you don't mind, Professor.
Thank you. Religious harmony, as long as everyone is doing what you tell them to do, is not necessarily difficult to achieve. And I think that's one of the main goals, as long as we keep in mind that the regime of Ilham Aliyev and his father before him really are interested in control and political power, and stability facilitates that. And so, for one thing, minority religions do not generally constitute the kind of threat, especially because they're pretty small minorities. A second point here is that the very positive relationship of the Jewish community to the Azerbaijanis as a whole and to the government has a long, long history. In the early years of the 20th century, when there were very bloody anti-Jewish pogroms in both Russia and Ukraine, Jews fled to Azerbaijan. And you can see the census data, this huge jump in the number of the Jewish community of Azerbaijan by the 20s. But there's also the issue that this is an important component in Azerbaijan's good relations with Israel today. And they have important trade relations. And Azerbaijan, of course, provides, not only energy, but buys a lot of weapon systems from the Israelis. So all of these things, I think, really figure very much into the bigger picture of domestic and also international stability. I'll leave it to my other respected colleagues here to talk more about the current manifestations of this. I do want to say before we all get off here that I have tremendous admiration also for Arzu Gabellah's work that I've been following over the years. And I'm taking notes on everything she says.
Thank you. Felix, if you don't mind, I would jump straight ahead, because in addition to everything that Adi just said, there are two additional things I would like to say. The religious harmony, or whatever the Azerbaijani state packages as religious harmony, is a very well-crafted image maintenance. It suits the government to show around all these different religious sites that exist in the country, that have been well maintained, that are supported, that are being almost in a way used as a PR campaign to show how open-minded this secular Muslim state is. Now, when it comes to religious freedoms, that is political and that is internal. And the notion, or the way the state perceives religious freedoms, is very much how they perceive political activism in the country. Because for them, religious groups forming political movements, mind you, not even a political party, political movements, religious groups coming together in their communities and openly talking about the issues that they're facing, or the injustice and the social, economic, political injustice that they're facing, that is a political matter for them that needs to be silenced, that needs to be prevented from getting out there, unlike the religious harmony that they very much like to get out there, if that makes sense.
If I can jump in then, I mean, I think the regime understands what religious freedom is. They understand what religious harmony is. in terms of religious freedom, they understand it, but they don't like it. And they're determined to prevent it from existing. Religious harmony, again, they understand it, but they're not going to allow it except in the Sovietized form, where you form religious communities into pyramids. You control the top of the pyramid, and that will control the lower parts of it. So they do not have tolerance for Armenians and their religious viewpoints. They do not have tolerance for Muslims who do not share the views of the state. They do not have tolerance for minority communities outside a very narrowly confined set of communities. Almost all of them are allowed only in the capital, Baku. Other places, they're very much restricted. So that's not religious freedom. That's not religious harmony. It is a PR stunt. And the leaders of registered religious organizations, as in the Soviet period, they have to speak nicely about the regime. They're hostages almost. And once a year, the government hands out money to religious communities. And I remember hearing some years ago that the Baha'i community was the only community that refused state money. They said, that's very kind of you, but we don't need it. All the others take money from the state every year. Why is the state offering them money? They never explain why, but you can guess that it's keeping them just, seeing who's the boss.
Considering religious harmony and tolerance and freedom in the country, I think it's interesting that there is Udi community in Azerbaijan, which is right now like trying to go and for pilgrimage to Armenian church in Karabakh. And this is actually used by Azerbaijani authorities, like to not only erase all these inscriptions that are like Armenians Armenified, all these Albanian churches. Now the community is going to pilgrimage and gaining control over their heritage. So I think Azerbaijan tolerates whatever there in Karabakh in terms of all these churches and heritage, Christian heritage, as far as it's able to kind of make them look non-Armenian. So I think that talks about much what kind of regime we are dealing with and are talking about it. So that is why, like, whenever it comes to ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh and their heritage, so we don't see any kind of hope, even kind of PR stunts, which it would be like Armenia related, Armenians related of Nagorno-Karabakh. They are just trying to erase whatever is a reminder of Armenian community there.
Thank you, everyone. Commissioner Hartzler, I know that you had one question. We have time for about one question and one quick answer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gulen. The Azerbaijani government kept referring to that during the time of in the 90s, the Nagorno-Karabakh war, that Armenia occupied many areas of Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh, and they destroyed churches, like 65 out of the 67 mosques in the area. Has your organization done any research into that, and is that a valid point that they're making?
Thank you. That is a very great question. In parallel to our investigation in Nakhchivan, we also our monitoring mission, we did a parallel investigation to figure out in what degree Armenian authorities, when they occupied Azerbaijan's territory as well as controlling Nagorno-Karabakh itself, how they treated Islamic Azerbaijani heritage. What is interesting, in the last 2 decades, Azerbaijani authorities, even President Ilham Aliyev was claiming that like 63 mosques out of 65 were destroyed in the region. Like we documented that like there is only 14 destruction cases in the region and 50% of damage to older heritage. But what is interesting, while Nagorno-Karabakh authorities who are in the control of all these regions, they fail to protect many of these sites from looting, from damage. But we don't see that kind of approach to systematically erase whatever was Islamic and Azerbaijani heritage there. This strikingly stands out to the way against like whatever was telling Azerbaijani authorities. So, of course, there were a lot of abuses of Azerbaijani Islamic heritage, but statistically, they are incomparable to what happened to Armenian heritage in Nakhichevan region of Azerbaijan.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, with that, we have come up against the clock. In closing, let me note that this will be my last USCIRF hearing in my tenure as chair. And I'm particularly pleased to close my term with such an important hearing. So thank you again to our distinguished witnesses for their critical testimonies on the religious freedom situation in Azerbaijan. And of course, especially thanks to our online audience for joining us today. This hearing is adjourned.